All right. What is good, YouTube family? Hopefully, you guys are doing blessed. We're back at it for another episode of Wyckoff Sundays. All right. Today, we're going to be going into obviously the last week. So, we're going to go into episode 28. All right. So, first thing we're going to talk about is dollar, as always, right? So, some of the possibilities that we were talking about for dollar was we first explored the idea of this here, this push to the downside here being a manipulation move, right? So below this level, right? Definitely a huge push to the downside. This was caused by NFP, if I'm not mistaken. And then we did end up having, the markets, the market tank for NFP, right? And then basically we're talking about two possibilities for last week. The first one being that we actually do manage to engulf this level, and the second one being that we come down into our more extreme area, which is just a little bit lower, right? And so what ended up happening, right? We did end up having the market heading towards the upside quite nicely, right? So this was the moment of Wyckoff Sundays last week, right? As you guys can see, that's exactly where price was. And I told you guys that I was basically looking for the longs on here just in case, because I did take a trade right after NFP, right? So I did manage to hold that, took a good amount of partials, and then on Friday we did end up breaking even on the rest of our position, but still a great win because the risk to reward was very high. So even with the partials, we still made a good amount, which was awesome. So we did manage to find entries like literally in there using Euro USD. And so this is literally where my entry was from NFP. And so we ended up holding that for the majority of the week. We can see that price ended up hitting our first target, which was just kind of making that new low. I took partials in this area and I took partials down here in this area. So we did manage to catch a good amount of the move. And in total, the trade ran for about a 1 to 6.8 risk to reward ratio using that, right? Now, when we went ahead and, kind of relate this to dollar, right? Again, our idea was to see us at least engulf towards this level here, right? Which we can see did happen, right? And then the other idea again was that price could be coming lower to some of our more extreme areas, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, all right? But all in all, basically when it comes to dollars analysis to buy up back towards that level, the possibility of that did end up happening. And then the other side was Euro USD, right? Which was what we spoke about here. Which was the possibility of, this being an institutional candle for us to go ahead and, push a little bit lower, right? So let's see what we go ahead and set here.
If it does that, right? If we end up just kind of pulling into the imbalance and then making another high, well, then we're going to have to take another attempt later on to see when we can start to target towards 1.15, basically flat. So yeah, that's kind of my idea here. For Euro USD, just again looking at pullbacks as excuses to short from there, but these levels here will hold, like I did say, on like that, right? And things like this where we're just kind of barely getting above levels. These are the kind of levels I love to play. And again, it does look like we are distributing, right? We're leaving the buyers in, right? And the sellers are having.
So yeah, again, kind of same idea as what I'm saying. Looking at what was happening here as potentially like we were distributing. Again, we spoke about the shorts that you can see were already on the screen right over there, right? So quite a nice move throughout the majority of the week. And then really when Friday came was when we started to see the signs of, accumulation. We can see the equal lows, the sweep, right? The retracement, right? So the 5 phases really did start to happen down here, which was a clear indication of that reversal that was to come. We're going to talk a bit later about what we can see happening for this current week. Are we still going to look at this as a distribution? What are we going to do? In a little bit, right? So that was dollar and Euro USD ideas. Both of them played out pretty well, right? The other one was Euro USD, which is, again, we were looking at also the potential for distributions with GU, right? I believe we did have a quick trade that we took on GU at some point last week. Was it this? I don't think it was. No, actually, I don't think that was last. I think it was the week before. So, never mind there. Yeah, no, this is where we took GU, was over here on the 6th, right? So, yeah, we didn't actually take anything on GU, and basically our idea was kind of the same as what we were thinking with Euro USD, but GU, again, did not really give as big of a push down. GU was looking a lot more bullish in its price action since we've had from that week, right? We could see that with Euro USD when we had, this final low where I took my last bit of partials. We can see that GU instead ended up showing a really nice reaccumulation scenario, right? Having that distribution, but then just going ahead and running the low of that distribution to go ahead and bring us higher. And we can see again the 5 phases type of setup that's there, right? Equal lows, sweep, impulse, mitigation, and then continuation, right? So GU right now looking pretty bullish, right? And same thing across the board, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. We spoke about USD CHF that we really only want to buy if price gets down to here. Price did not even end up coming anywhere near there, right? So we're still kind of holding those relatively equal lows as of right now. If anything, we're kind of building up more liquidity, which is definitely interesting with USHEF, right? Now, the other one we spoke about, I believe, was UCAD, right? UCAD did end up giving a good opportunity for us. If I'm not mistaken, we did talk about UCAD last week. It might have just been on the live streams that we have during the week that we spoke about it, but I do remember speaking about UCAD.
The chef, USD CHF is going to post G looking for oil. Either
Yeah, that's
this
USD
time we want to be kind of shaping up.
UJ, AU. No, I believe we didn't talk about UCAD then. But really the zone that we've been talking
price to
about, like
sweep
even in previous weeks, was a zone that did end up getting hit and giving some good short-term opportunities, but didn't really hold out for the long term. So we did end up catching buys on UCAD from this level down here. We attempted buys again over here, but I did end up cutting those shorts, as well, instead of like obviously waiting for this low to get taken because of the distribution that happened up here, right? But decent bounces from this level from the week before, from last week, right, which was on the 12th. Again, just kind of coming back into the last zone on the daily, which was the trap candle here, right? But we're going to talk about again what we can see potentially happening here on dollar, because it is looking pretty interesting now as time goes on, right? Next thing we spoke about was metals, right? So we said basically that metals right now was looking very bullish. We said the only way we'd really want to be looking to short something like metals would be if we ended up getting breaks below levels like this one, which we never really ended up getting, right? Obviously gold just ended up continuing to buy up a little bit higher, right? Not too much movement really. But yeah, we'll go ahead and look at this here real quick. And yeah, I believe this is from a lesson here I was doing. So let me go ahead and delete all that. So yeah, so basically over here, right, we can see with metals, nothing too crazy. This was where was it that Wyckoff Sundays left off? I believe it was here. So what we basically said was the only way we'd look to short is if we really started to break below. We didn't do that. We ended up continuing to drive higher. I think we did actually find a type 3 opportunity during one of our sessions here, on the live streams. But we didn't end up holding it for that long, right? I think we ran for like a 1 to 3, 1 to 2. Yeah, almost a 1 to 3 here on that move. Took partials. And then price ended up coming back to, basically hit it out. So we'll see if this can end up becoming a distribution. We did have a breakdown, but we'll talk about that again a little bit later. I don't think I took this trade here. I think I was waiting to see if we could get a retracement to this institutional candle. We never did, so I never took that short. So really, we took one short on gold, right? But, according to what we were talking about again last week, there wasn't really much, of an opportunity there other than trying to find like type 3s. Which we tried to find in there and in there, that just didn't end up playing out, right? Didn't end up retracing the ways that we wanted, or didn't end up breaking, through structure the ways that we wanted. So, yeah, gold still here looking, still looking relatively strong, right? But we're going to talk about this again in a bit in terms of what we can see happening this coming week, right? Next thing we talked about was indices, right? Obviously still looking to be bullish, but given that we've already had such a strong impulse to the upside, we again just wanted to see price get back to some significant levels to go ahead and help us determine that the next longs could be coming. I believe we did talk about a short-term zone here as well. I'm not sure though. Let's go ahead and see what we spoke about here.
High point, right? So it's not would be best. Right now we're at a very high point, right? So it's not really the area to buy, but it does look bullish now, guys, right? After kind of having this huge buy up at the bottom, having that accumulation, I say pullbacks are excuses to go ahead and long this back up. So I would love to see price pull back to here.
So yeah, basically just looking at the previous points of order flow, again, not really much happening from that perspective though, but yeah, we did see kind of a distribution that did turn into an accumulation. I don't think we spoke about that as a zone on the Wyckoff Sundays.
Right, same thing with US 30, right? Zones lower are better to use, and then same thing with S&P. So only time will tell where we get into, guys. I keep saying it, but again, we have to react to the market and see what it gives us. Right now, we're just way too high to try and take a buy from these levels, right? We're way too high up there. So it doesn't really make sense for us to, try and use that, right? All right, cool. So that's S&P, NAS, US 30 said.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so there I believe then we spoke about this reaccumulation on the live stream, not on the Wyckoff Sundays. So what we had spoken about was this distribution turned into an accumulation there. If we were looking for, a higher point of interest, this was a decent area to play from. But again, nothing really super high quality because we're at such a high point. But yeah, I think Tuesday was when the golden opportunity came for NASDAQ. But even then, it was very late in the session. We could see the bottom happen at around 2 p.m., 2:30 p.m. EST, almost the end of the session. But it did end up becoming the bottom, right? But not really, the best opportunities in general. So still bullish, right? To me, the way that NASDAQ pretty much took back completely after, taking out all these lows, right, that happened over here, that to me is starting to look like potential flips. So I think we're in our impulsive phase right now, waiting to see when we can come back to a mitigation phase. Could be here, but really it could be anywhere in this range to the downside there. So we're going to see when we end up getting that. As of right now, it's just about waiting and being patient, reacting to what the market gives us if it does end up giving us an opportunity, right? The next thing we spoke about was BTC, that we wanted to see more shorts coming into the market. We were thinking that ideally, what we would want to see would be all these highs here that were kind of almost, just a little bit too close together, making it a bit easy to short. We wanted to see those get swept, right? Before then going ahead and coming back towards the 61 level, I believe is what we said, right? If we did see price engulfed, then that was going to be, basically where we would go to the other side and maybe be bullish, but obviously price never did that. So we were still bearish on it. Let's go ahead and see.
Right, we swept. Like, look at all these, because it does look like it has some potential to be an accumulation down here. And then we had the buy. Like, we definitely just want to be, careful, right? And just play in extreme areas like this one. I do still think it's worth it to take an attempt in there if we get the right price action, up here that we like, right? And then maybe from there, after taking the highs at 65,700, we can short.
So yeah, we wanted to short, but again, did not quite give us that new high. So we could see here that price did make a new high since Wyckoff Sundays, but just not quite as high as we wanted. We can see that this recent high there ended up getting swept. Took this high as well with it, right? Ended up respecting this one. And so it didn't end up taking like, a big sweep that we really wanted. But now we're all the way back down here, right? So for me, with BTC, again, obviously still bearish on it. I do think that reaching down towards these levels and maybe even deeper is going to be good for us to give another shakeout for the buyers to then really give us the next buy, right? I do think the buys are coming sooner than most people think, all right? So yeah, definitely tapping into those levels, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Next thing we spoke about was US oil. We were speaking about some potential buy zones on oil. We showed that we were basically inside of this previous area. This imbalance here was obviously the most ideal. I believe Steve mentioned that back then. But the imbalance did not end up getting hit, and price pretty much just bounced from that level, right? So we see here, the imbalance didn't get hit, but the zone that we spoke about there, did end up getting hit pretty nicely, and we have completely engulfed that push to the downside. So this to me is looking very bullish, guys, right? Oil is very bullish to me at the moment, and we'll talk about we'll revisit this now that we finished going through all the pairs, right? So all in all, last week dollar went pretty well, gave us a good buy opportunity. Euro USD was the trade of the week, and then basically from there we took partials in the right areas, let things come back to break even, and everything basically now on the Friday has kind of changed with another impulse to the downside on dollar, right? So let's go ahead and revisit what we can see happening for this current week. All right, so this current week coming up, we're going to start off with dollar. Okay, so last week, as we can see, the price action that we had was pretty good for the bulls, right? Which was us, obviously, right? So we did end up getting a nice reaction to the upside. We even found a re-entry opportunity over here during CPI last week on the Wednesday. Kind of thinking of this as a potential mitigation, especially given the fact that, again, we had this liquidity that was over here. So if any of you guys were on the live session on Wednesday, you guys pretty much would have seen this, manipulation move down to go ahead and bring us up to a new high. Now, from that point forward, right, we can obviously see that here we ended up getting a bit of a sweep at the top of this liquidity, right? So this here is the top of the liquidity. If we can go ahead and bring this line over, right, we can see that that line was just, that high was just barely taken with this push to the upside there, right? So just a really quick push up to then go ahead and bring us right back down. Right. So the way that this is kind of looking is, it's not exactly screaming strength to me, right? Obviously when we want to go ahead and see a new higher high, we want to see that price really sustains above that level well. In this case, we obviously didn't see that, right? We saw that price did make a new high, but it didn't do so exactly commanding a lot of strength, right? It went ahead, just barely went above it and came right back down, retested that high, and then continued with a big push to the downside on the Friday, right? So because that's the way that price ended up playing out, the way that this low is looking is less and less likely to hold, right? So for me, I think what we're expecting is another impulse to the downside on dollar. The way that things are looking now is, we've kind of been consolidating for a while now. It's been almost 2 weeks that we have been kind of in this range that we can see from here to here, right? So this is kind of our general range, for those 15 days. And, obviously that was right after coming off of a big push to the downside. Now, what we've been saying is that we want to see a real clean accumulation, a very good, basically sweep on lows to really give us the indication that price can really buy from, right? Now, do we know where this sweep can necessarily stop? Not really, right? There's not really a way to know where that sweep is going to stop, but I think that what we can expect is that this current low that we were playing off of last week is less likely to hold given the way that we reacted over here, right? If we look at this from kind of a accumulation perspective, to me, I think this is phase B. I think that when we look at it from the Wyckoff perspective, this would be kind of our, phase A. This would be kind of our PSY, right? So this would be our BC, our SC, right? Our AR, ST, ST in phase B. I think that this has some chance of being our UT, and potentially however long this impulse is here, right? Again, remember this is the 4-hour time frame. So this can be a couple of consecutive candles before we go ahead and see the buy up. I don't know how long that spring is going to be, but I do think that a spring is coming essentially for this. So the fact that we have a consolidation after coming off of a very big push to the downside is a good thing, right? It is a good thing for our buy idea. Because it's not like we're just, crashing out of nowhere, right? We crashed and then we stopped, right? And now we're ranging. We're giving, banks, institutions, big money the opportunity to accumulate positions, right? Now their goal is going to be to swipe out and to, demoralize all of those retail traders that are looking for that next buy up on dollars. So we want to make sure not to get sucked into this accumulation phase, right? We want to make sure we stay as patient as possible with this, right? So let's go ahead and kind of show here real quick an accumulation so that we kind of have it side by side here. I think that's the accumulation there, yeah. So basically that's kind of what we're looking for here is, could this have been like basically our STM phase B into a UT? Right now we're starting to see price, walk its way down, and then we're going to have a spring that comes below, right? That spring can be a very aggressive spring, or it can be a very small one. So just because we end up like, let's say just barely getting below here or anything, I would still want to be cautious on it, and just make sure that we, go ahead and wait for, some proper institutional candles to print on those bigger time frames, give some good tests and reactions. Maybe we don't even really need to enter on a bigger time frame test. Sorry, on a smaller time frame test, we can enter on a smaller time frame LPS, right? Because understand right now what we're doing, right? So first, you understand the bigger time frame context, right? So the bigger time frame context is that we're expecting that we've already been accumulating, right? And that we're currently in the signs of strength that's coming back down into our BU/LPS, right? That's what we're expecting. Now, what we understand about Wyckoff is that each point in Wyckoff is going to have that signs of manipulation. It's going to have that accumulation schematic inside of it that we can read, right? That can give us the indication that, oh, okay, this point is probably here, right? This point is most likely happening right here because the smaller time frame relative to this bigger time frame idea is giving us that manipulation that we want, right? So that's what we're expecting, right? Now, from the weekly time frame perspective, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for this to kind of be in phase D on that bigger time frame perspective, right? Now, from the smaller time frame perspective, when we're talking about from the weekly going down to like the 4 hour, right, and stuff like that, this is where we're now going to want to see this here essentially become our accumulation on that smaller time frame to give us the idea of where that BU/LPS can be, right? So what we want to see happen obviously is going to be like a manipulation candle down, right? So like let's say a down candle like this, right? So give us a big down candle, right? And then go ahead and give us the up candle, right? But understand that, you know, we don't need to have like you know, the bottom for us to necessarily take advantage of this move, right? If this is going to be like a reaccumulation that we want, right, we're going to be able to take advantage of tests, LPS wise, you know, BU/LPSs that happen on this smaller time frame. So my advice to you guys for this week would be to be patient, right? But I do think that, again, with where we closed last week, I think it's pretty likely that this is the week that we have this sweep that we're looking for on the bigger time frame to go ahead and see price, again, start to head towards 102. But understand that that's what our target is, right? Our target is 102. Right, obviously our first target is going to be to fill some of the imbalances that happened here, right? But you know, that being said, stay patient. Don't try and catch the bottom, right? Go ahead and try and catch the tests. Try and catch the tests. Try and catch the LPSs that happen before we get that jump across the creek that we're expecting, right? Because once we do start to break out from this accumulation range, I think it's going to be a fast move towards these highs because of how fast this push to the downside is. However far it goes, I think the push to the upside is also going to be just as fast, right? So, you know, obviously just more so keep an eye on the range, you know, keep an eye for, you know, reactions back inside of the range, right? And then go ahead and try and find follow-ups from there, right? That's basically my advice for you guys this week. But what I do think will happen is there's going to be a sweep down. So the question is, you know, obviously, what are the zones that we can expect this sweep to come into, right? So obviously the first zone is going to be the one that we've been talking about for a while, which is going to be this area down here. We can see that we had all these relatively equal lows that ended up getting swept with this push to the downside. I don't remember which Wyckoff Sundays this was, but we did talk about this level, this sweep there before. That could be a zone that we do get a reaction from, right? The next zone that could be happening is this big push to the downside. That is the bottom of our LPS, right? So those are going to be the two main zones that can potentially happen, right? Now, you know, it just depends on how far that push to the downside is really going to, you know, take place with, right? You know, are we going to have a push to the downside that, you know, goes there, or is it going to end up coming a little bit farther, right? Both of these are totally valid, you know, zones for it. I do think this one is the more likely one given how close we are to it and the fact that we've been ranging for a while. If we were to drop down into this level, we would be clearing out quite a bit of buyers, right? So I do think that this is the more likely zone. But again, just also keep in mind that this zone is the possible, you know, follow-up zone, I guess you could say, for it as well, right? So yeah, that's really what I would say here with dollar is wait for the right candles to print, right? Maybe on the daily time frame, you know, we can take 1, 2, or 3 candles to go ahead and come down, right? And then when we start to get that bullish candle that's engulfing, look for that retest inside of that candle, right? That's really what my advice would be, you know, for you guys. So I think that we're in the accumulation. I think that we're in phase B. So go ahead and, you know, obviously look for, you know, that phase C to take place. Wait for that spring to stop, and then go ahead and look for the test, look for the LPSs to bring us back to the upside here. But that's really my idea here with dollar, guys. Okay, so if we do end up completely engulfing through those two zones, right? So if we don't end up, you know, holding this weekly low or holding this weekly low there, then maybe we'll have to look at the possibility that this could end up being kind of like a redistribution sweep that brings us all the way down, and maybe we actually do get our next, you know, push to the downside, right? That could be the case. But until we go ahead and break through that level, I'm going to still be looking for the buy side of things, okay? Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. But yeah, for right now, no reason to buy at the moment, right? don't be buying right now at the moment. Go ahead and wait and see what kind of price action do we get in this area, right? If nothing, what kind of price action do we get in this area? And if we get the right type of price action, then we're going to find our reasons to buy. But even when I look at other things, like for example, I was looking at NZD USD earlier, the price action that we're getting currently from a 4-hour to a daily perspective is extremely bullish, right? We have this low here. That's a reaccumulation low, right? We had the distribution that played out there, but then we have that turned into an accumulation down here, right? Same thing over here. We get this distribution here, right? And we go ahead and just sweep the low of that, right, with an institutional candle there, right? So you guys can see this sweep that happened there on NU, right? That right there, again, kind of showing that another sign of reaccumulation. So when I look at even the daily as well on this, I mean, it looks so bullish. Like even that push to the downside, coming back and accounting for this daily time frame imbalance, right? Right now there is no price action that's telling us to short, right? That's what I'm saying. So since there's no price action that's telling us to short here, now what we have to do is wait for that new high to happen, right? See if we can end up even holding this high at all, right? And then kind of look for that right price action, right? But I would just, again, like I said, approach it with caution, right? We're still going to stick with the same bias, but approach it with caution because I think a sweep is coming and we don't know when that sweep is necessarily going to stop. So let that sweep stop, let the push to the upside start to form, so you again, have the ammo that you need to continue, right? But even when we look at EU, right, like EU on a daily time frame perspective doesn't exactly look bearish, right? It's, 4-hour a little bit more so. I mean, we do kind of have this liquidity that's still there that we never tapped into, which was the 1.15 flat that we mentioned last week. But we did take out this immediate low here, and we did so, like I mentioned earlier, with a beautiful sweep, right, to the downside right there that we did mitigate. So right now, the price action, the evidence there completely is, bullish. So we want to go ahead and wait, see what happens when we get that next push to the downside on dollar, which I think is happening personally. I think we will get another push down lower, down below the 99.38. And then in terms of when that stops, that's what's going to determine when are the rest of these going to stop, right? Even GU, for example, GU ended up taking out this extreme high, right? So like, do we get a reaction up here, right? Are we going to go even higher and then get a reaction up there, right? It's, but when I look at a lot of the price action here, I mean, it's looking more and more bullish, from my perspective here. So we'll see what ends up happening, right? If we don't end up getting any reaction in those levels, well then, we're going to have to swap our bias, right? But I think for right now, it doesn't make sense necessarily to do so, because there is still the signs of accumulation that have happened, right? We did have a huge sell-off down into a new price level. In that price level, we then started consolidating, we started holding, right? Kind of giving kind of the, like I said, it looks more like a Wyckoff accumulation is playing out, like they're taking time to go ahead and accumulate more dollar. So that is still what I'm going to be looking for unless price shows us otherwise and we end up dropping completely through this LPS here. I think that would be a very bearish sign if we did drop through the LPS. So these are really our extreme areas that we're getting into, and that's what we're going to want to hopefully get for our next push towards 102 that we've been talking about for months. Okay, guys? So that's the currency outlook. All right, let's go ahead and look at, the metals outlook, right? So obviously, if we're going to go ahead and look for, dollar to make another low, well, then technically gold will also be making another high, technically with that, right? Now, when dollar does end up starting to buy back up, then we can get gold to potentially do, the opposite and come back to the downside. The question is, where are we really going to get into, right? We kind of did get a bit of a distribution type price action here. We did even kind of get almost, equal lows at this level here. So, again, we do kind of have to look at gold a little bit independently compared to dollar because sometimes gold makes the move first. Sometimes it, just follows its own way completely. These equal lows don't exactly stream strength to me in this low, so I wouldn't exactly want to buy just because we have this push to the downside that came back up. It does kind of look like I would prefer to get a little bit lower, which would be, maybe down in here, right, where we see this as the next available sweep. In that, just because, again, even though we did see this push to the downside barely break through that level, it didn't really do enough, I would say, right? So maybe there are some short opportunities coming in short term and then long opportunities coming in later on. Looking at this, the daily candles and the way that they've printed, I think this next daily candle is going to be really telling, because again, we do have this push to the upside here, so we have like this trap candle, we have that bullish candle there. That bullish candle there could end up being an institutional candle that then does end up giving us the drive lower. To be honest, it is kind of looking like that. And again, what we've been saying here with gold and with silver was that we did want one more push to the downside, but as of right now, it's hard for me to really call out shorts. So I think it's probably going to be best for us to just take a back seat here with metals, really. I think that we have some potential for this to be shorts, right? But, again, it could easily give us another push to the upside. We do have some more extreme areas over here, right? We can see some sweeps that happened previously, that if we were to make one more high up here, that it would end up kind of, making more sense there. Maybe this whole zone here is a pretty good supply zone. Probably a little higher actually with these here. Just focusing on more so the actual sweep there. Which again here, this is where we have that up candle that goes ahead and takes these relatively equal highs. Perhaps up there could be where we see price come down. But we're gonna see what happens here if we do end up getting the market to short off from this distribution, or if we end up getting one more high and then giving us that push to the upside, after that. I was looking for a reaction from the 1 hour trap candle at 43.54, which is right here. Okay. So basically right in this area to buy from. Could be the case if we look at this as a reaccumulation. So the way that this would really look would be, you would basically be saying, all right, this here is our distro, right? This low that happened here would be like us sweeping the low of that distribution. The issue being that it's so close, right? Is that enough? It could be, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it does take out the low, right? So if that is the bigger time frame Wyckoff narrative that, that's going to be our reaccumulation moment, then that could be the moment that we buy from. And then in that case, again, looking for order flow like the 1 hour trap candle that you have pointed out there could be a zone to look for, but I'm not super convinced at the low. I like to see obviously bigger sweeps, especially with the reaccumulation side of things. So it's tough for me to say right now at this moment with this, right? Daily candle, I could see the buying happen, right? If this candle were to engulf this down candle, then this down candle could end up being a trap candle. But guys, if we end up getting a push down, I mean, this could end up being also, like I said, an institutional candle to bring us down. So I could go either way right now. I think it's just about letting this do its thing. Either one, get into a more extreme sell area, or two, get into a more extreme buy area, right? Because we do have this daily trap candle right here, which is also, again, the previous zone there. So tough to say, for right here. I don't really have a good call out for you guys for metals at the moment. We are kind of rounding out. It looks like it could be distributing, but that being said, I'm not super convinced just yet with the price action for the buys. I would have liked to have seen a bigger sweep, but if you guys like those zones, I think definitely they can make sense. Just make sure we get the right price action in those areas, and just keep in mind you're basically looking at this low here to be our spring of our reaccumulation potential there with gold, right? So we'll see, right? Either one, we follow the distribution, we continue, or two, the reaccumulation has already happened, right? That's really the two main things, right? So there's gold, right? Now let's go ahead and go into indices. So indices here, kind of interesting. Last week we had a beautiful institutional candle print in the middle of the week. This was on the Tuesday there, right? NASDAQ as well. NASDAQ here, sorry. That was where the buy happened there. So US 30 and NASDAQ ended up diverging. And then NASDAQ ended up buying through those levels. Again, guys, I am more bullish on these right now. I do still think that these can most likely recover. Look at S&P really just, breaking through all those highs. So again, I do think that the biggest thing we can do is just wait for bigger pullbacks, get better daily institutional candles type of thing. As of right now, there's no real reason for me to buy from these levels. I want to see bigger pullbacks to come in from here. So nothing from me just yet. All right, guys. There's that. Now BTC. Again, we already spoke about BTC on what I'm looking for. Really, I think that this low here at 61, it's only a matter of time before we go ahead and reach down towards those levels. I think this push to the downside here is just starting that out, and we're just going to go ahead and get a price to fall down towards 60. So if at 60 we get a buy opportunity, then perfect. I think this can be a zone where maybe we end up kicking off the bull run. It's not impossible, right? We do it like we've been mentioning for a couple weeks now. We do have that volume divergence that's been playing out, right? Or we end up getting one more low, right? Again, on maybe even lower volume, right? And then from there we end up driving higher. But this is definitely still a valid zone to explore at 61, right? Or at 60, I mean. And if not 60, then again, maybe down here at the 56, 55 level, we can get one more push to the downside there, right? But I think short term, we are heading down below 61. And then after that, guys, if you like BTC for buys, I don't think it's a bad zone to look for, especially if you're looking for more of a long-term thing, right? So that's the idea there for BTC. Definitely 61 first, and then we'll see if buys make sense there. Now US oil. So US oil, I am bullish on now, guys, right? This could end up even being a zone that we buy from currently, which is here. But I would obviously prefer a bigger pullback inside of this, right? So hopefully we can get down towards these, 70%, 78% retracement levels. But yeah, basically this push to the downside here, anywhere is valid for potential buys on oil. And then we're probably going to be buying up, I think, to a new high. No real reason not to. And I think that even just with the price action we just had, with this kind of like, almost distribution type price action on the way up, that then got swept out with this push to the downside, I think this is our sign that this is likely a bottom down here at 74. And so then we're going to go ahead and eventually head up towards even the 90s, 95s, potentially even higher, maybe towards these highs here at 119. So we'll see, right? But it does look like sweep after sweep to me right now. This is showing a lot of strength, right? This push to the downside engulfed, right? Now this push to the downside engulfed, right? It could be that this was our mitigation phase for that push to the downside, and then now we're going to go into our continuation phase. So let's see. All right, guys. So that's it from me today. All right, I'm going to be posting this on YouTube, so anybody who missed it, you guys can tap in again, or if you just want to see it happen one more time. All right, guys. So I'll catch you guys on the next one. All right, much love, much appreciation. Best of luck trading this week. Be careful, as always. All right, take it easy. Bye-bye. Deuces.